Is it
Ready when you are.
okay, there's two things that I gotta show because they just cracked me up.
Could you first show us how to make your fonts about 5 times larger?
That's the easy way.
Anybody else? Trust me, that's not the best one. I am a professional smartass. I don't just do it for work. Okay, this just cracks me up.
That was the Holloman?
Okay, that's the Holloman. Yeah, that's just something that I got. It's been cracking me up the last few days. I laugh at it every time I see it.
Was that a typical class that this school offers?
I am not affiliated with FIT.
Technical sign language, yeah.
Acting!
Neither do I believe that they will ever let me affiliate with them. Okay, thank you, Digital Blasphemy, for the background. It's worth paying them for their stuff.
There you go.
Big enough?
Yep.
Yes? Everybody see that okay? It gets a little bit smaller than this. The address down there, party@fosug.org, it's just good to be the admin. So if you need to send me an email, that'll work, and I'll reply to you with my regular address. But I'm reluctant to give out my address any more than it already is. Join a couple of SourceForge projects and just one high-profile project, and you're pretty much doomed to spam forever. And actually, part of this is actually wrapped around my spam solution that I've spoken to several of you about before. So we'll get into that a little bit. Okay, note to self: if you want to hit my address, which I believe that I'm still up. If config, yeah, that helps. Yeah, 10.00.74, and I'm still available. So you can hit my address, and you can get the stuff that I'm going to be covering. You can see the demo; it'll serve it up for you. Please don't hack my webpage. There is very little, or actually no, data checking on this. So if you wait just a minute, it'll be groovy. So that we can go over how it works. Okay, what is RRDtool? Whoops. Gotta learn how to do my own stuff here. I should click, not hit space. It's a round-robin database tool, so hey, that's kind of duh. That's in the name. What's a round-robin database tool? Well, it consists of several things. It's a database that, instead of where you have your traditional database where you have a table and you just keep adding records to the end of it until forever, round-robin database tool, you take and you have, I know I want this much data, and you want the data to cycle through it on a regular basis. A great example is like for router config. The first tool that was written using RRDtool that I'm aware of is MRTG, which was also written by Tobias, which is his way of tracking the load on his routers on per interface basis. And if you've ever configured MRTG, you know why I don't run it. It's a pain in the butt. Okay, I run Cricket. Why? Because Cricket will go out and query my Cisco router, and as long as I know enough about Cisco to put comments in and configure it right, it pulls it all out of the router and just does it. Makes the tree. It's really nice. There's also literally dozens of tools written around RRDtool. What RRDtool doesn't do that you're going to ask, I know, is it does not do pie graphs, it does not do 3D graphs, it does line or area graphs, period. That's it. If you want it to do more than that, learn C, hack the code. It's really not that bad. It uses the GD library, which is pretty simple. Well, somebody who knows C, it's pretty simple. And the example that I give here is that you only want 30 days of data. So you want to know this particular item, say temperatures, for the last 30 days, and you want to do averages, you want to do different things like that. You can do it with RRDtool. Oops. Gotta get away from the keyboard. Okay, you know exactly how much data. Okay, and you want graphically represent that data because RRDtool takes care of that for us as well. We're going to see as we get later on that RRDtool will not only output to a file that you tell it, which is pretty intelligent about grokking the file and going, oh, you put .ping on that. That means you wanted a ping file. It will also output as a stream so that you can tie this directly to PHP or whatever and just do a pass-through call in PHP, or in Perl just do a system call and then blurb out the whole thing so that you have no write to disk for this at all, unless of course you're swapping, which if you're swapping you configured your Apache wrong, you need to start over. And then lastly, to impress Hacksay with your graph food. Hacksay is the feminine of hacker if you don't know. And credits. Everybody done with that? Yes, good, no, bad, other?
What's your IP address?
74.
Okay.
Need a quarter? So you can pay attention?
By the way, that nmap was me.
Oh, that's all right. You'll find 80 open.
Yep, I did. Went right to the PHP site.
I have Nichols mail stats.
That's it.
I have PHP version 4.2.
Yeah, that's the root index. If you actually, let's see, let's go back for Mike because he can't pay attention.
Yeah.
Right.
Somebody got a quarter for Mike? It's /RRD/. And then the RRD file list is actually, I took and set as your friend, I took the HTML files and zapped the greater than less than's that make it an HTML, added little HTML above and below it so that it would print out nice, and they are copy and pastable if you want. I wouldn't do a view source because that won't work. Okay. Keep going, keep going. Okay. Tobias Oedeker or Edeker, I don't know how to say his last name, and if he was here he'd probably beat me for slandering it, but that's how you spell it. And that's his homepage for RRDtool. All of the stuff that he does that's web-based is under the web tools, obviously. You'll find MRTG there also. You'll find RRD World, which is a good link of a number of the projects that are written using RRD. And for me, I put the ones that I'm most familiar with and that I've used the most. The one that I haven't used that is intriguing, but I haven't used it because I can't really justify finding the time to put into running it, is the last one here, this cacti. I gotta use it, so cacti. It's kind of like a Swiss Army knife of RRD. You can configure it to do whatever. But the downside to it is if you don't use what the generic slam dunk stuff is that they have in there for you, you have to write it yourself. So if you don't know how to write it yourself to gather the data, oh, you're kind of pooched.
We use cacti.
You do?
Yeah.
You like it?
Yeah. You can do
It
anything
looks
you
pretty
want.
cool.
You can do anything you want with it.
Yeah.
You can figure it out.
Yeah, and that's the key, is to get the data to the RDs. Once you get that done, it's pretty much slam dunk, and it's all web configurable. You can do all the stuff that we're going to do with command line stuff here via the web. It's just a slam dunk. Okay, SMTP with RRDtool. Who knows what SMTP stands for? Anybody want to say it? Wrong. Spam mitigation tracking process. It's obvious. Figure I've used the protocol since everybody else does. This is the example that I'm going to be using is for me personally tracking my the performance of BOGO filter on my installation at home. And what I wanted to know how many messages and then the training results. Now the training results here is when spam comes in for me, or when any mail comes in for me, it runs through BOGO filter and it gives it one of three states. It says yes, it's spam, no, it's not, it's ham, or maybe it's, I don't know. Spam is classified as 95% or greater on a probability. It's a Bayesian filter, sorry. So it's a statistical analysis of the words inside of the, well, not just the words, but the tokens. It tokenizes stuff like IP addresses and stuff. And then below 5% is ham automatically. And then anything between 6% and 94%, you know, with the nines and all that, is considered unsure. And I have to train on error. And if anybody's interested, I'll show you the shell script that I wrote to do that too. So it's like pain-free. I go through and it's like, it lists all the messages that are unsure and it goes, okay, you know, spam or not. I tell it spam, not spam, spam, not spam, delete, because I don't put viruses into my spam database because that's just the fraught with peril. So the problem I had is not learning how to use my presentation software. Is how am I going to archive the old data into an RRD table? And as the new data comes in, this is a portion that I actually haven't done yet because my solution for archiving the old data is so easy that it's just a matter of like 5 minutes to make it work. And it uses commodity tools, sed, shell, Perl. Boom, that's it. For my data availability, I have most of my mail for the last 3 years. I saved my spam because I believe in Bayesian filtering. I like Bayesian filtering. I'm not a big fan of RBLs or gray listing. I think gray listing is evil and you shouldn't do it. What is it, TMDA? If you do TMDA to me, you will never get another mail from me. I'll tell you that right now. Or TDMA, it's TMDA. It's where you send an email and the first time you send an email, it sends you a receipt back saying I'm holding your message, and in order to get your message through, you have to reply to this other message, and then I'll send the original message through. Well, I can't tell you how many backscatters I get of this on viruses that people are forging my address. So it's just a pain in the butt, because nowadays a lot of the mail viruses are not only grokking the Outlook database, but they look through the temp files for mail addresses that somebody could have picked up from a Google dredge. All of your internet cache is susceptible to the same thing for dredging for an email address. So I mean, I get dozens of these a day. Sometimes it depends. It depends on the level of clue of the Windows user who's gotten affected. Because most of the stuff I'm on is like MUT mailing list and lots of Quanta Plus stuff. But yeah, I have 3 years worth of mail cache. The rest of it is zipped up. I didn't care to unzip it. So our whole spool here is going to be based on 3 years of mail. I have in my mail, I get a header. Instead of doing the X bogosity header, which comes with BOGO filter, I changed it to X is spam. It's trivial config hack, not a big deal. And that header is just added to the standard mail headers as it's parsed by BOGO filter. It goes through BOGO filter, adds that at the bottom of them, and that's it. So we're going to use that. Then fetch mail, because I use fetch mail because the domain that I have, artnickel.com, isn't my primary domain. So I just have fetch mail running as a daemon. Every 90 seconds it checks my email, downloads it, shoves it back through my local postfix, which shoves it through BOGO filter and then back to the local mail delivery. Well, that last step leaves a very specific header as the received header in mail. We won't get into a lot of mail. If you know what I'm talking about, great. If you don't, it's not that important. Just that it leaves a very significant mark, and it's within like 4 seconds of when I get the mail. So it's not a big deal. It's accurate for my purposes for date time stuff. Now the data problems is, okay, what are we after? What exactly am I trying to do with all this data? as far as what explicit pieces are we trying to get. And then the data is not already parsed. It's a bunch of single files for each message. Some of the files are huge because they're attachments of all my wares that I get over email. Ooh. I run Linux. It's not wares. Man, tough audience. So I have to parse through all the emails and get this information out. And what do I do with messages that don't have the XIS spam header? Do I just delete them? Do I want to even worry about that? Or do I do some sort of a global solution? And then a good example is mail that I send out doesn't get scanned for spam because it's clean, it's going out. And then the volume of data. I have 23,000 messages after deleting the ones that, or after not counting the ones that have any kind of an error. The methodology that I actually used is I took and created a script that parses out the headers that I'm interested in, that received header, and then the XIS spam header, and then counts the number of messages in that directory because I use maildir, which makes one file per message. And then it says, okay, there's this many messages in there. There should be exactly twice as many lines in my output for having the received header and the XIS spam header because I normalized the received header, so it's all in one line. Cheap said hack. It's on the net if you want to look for it. And so if it's not exactly double that, I just skip the whole directory. I don't even include it. And the only one that doesn't fit into that situation is my sent mail, which is what it should be. So that's the thing that I'm looking at right now as far as how I got the volume of data. And most of those messages were spam messages because I saved much more spam, but a lot of them are lists and just my personal archive of mail. Okay. Now, what we're after, message counts. Hourly, 4. Total number of messages, how many spam, how many ham, which is, non-spam. Unsure, these are the 3 classes that I was telling you about. And then I want to look at, okay, well, now that I've got them, I want to know if it came in as unsure, was it spam, was it ham, and then what version of BOGO filter am I running? Because over those 3 years, I've run 3 separate versions of BOGO filter as it's been upgraded. And the upgrade process from the 0.13 to the 0.17 was easy, but they changed methodology, so my word list was kind of screwed. My fault. I did it to myself. So some of the results that I got in the middle there weren't so great. Parsing. Okay. Bash, sed, and Perl. You guys can look on the site to see what it is. I think it's like a total of 100 lines of code for the parsing. The sed scripts are both like 5 lines. It's not a big deal. And then what I use bash for is for this part, is to recurse through the directory. Bash is kind of the glue that glues the other pieces together. The Perl is the last piece. Yeah, there we go. And Perl, the reason I use Perl is because I don't like arrays in bash because they're not multi-dimension. And so you end up with a nightmare if you try and do that in bash. So I implemented Perl, and the nice thing about that is that Perl whips through these pretty fast. It takes the last, what ends up being whatever name you give it for the output file, it puts a .final on the end and adds in all the information the Perl script picks up the .final, and then it gives you the output for running the shell command to actually input the data into the RRDtool, into the round robin database. There we go. And that's what got us there. Now, this big old long hairy command, or what looks like a hairy command, is the actual create command for the database. All this is doing is each of these, you'll notice each of these DSs, those are all data sources, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. And then the RRAs are the actual piece that you use the most. These are called round robin archives. And these are also explained a little bit later. This is obvious enough. You're creating this file, okay? This is a Unix timestamp. Okay, if you don't know what a Unix timestamp is, it's the number of seconds elapsed since the epoch. And what's the epoch? Well, in most Unixes, it's January 1st, 1970 at midnight.
What is it on the Mac?
I forget, it's like 1983 or something.
No, it's 1900.
1900? Okay.
That early, somewhere in the early 20th century.
Yeah, I don't remember. But on Linux and what I'm running, this is the, that's why I put mandate here, because if you run mandate on your system, it'll tell you what the epoch is, so that you can find out what it is, because it's different in different places. And then the step, this start tells it when the first date that is going to exist in your RRD template. Now that's important because one of the features of an RRD database is that you cannot ever put in like January 1st, January 2nd, and then January 1st again. You always have to be incrementing the timestamp. If you don't, it'll just tell you that you can't do it and error out. You won't get the data in. And the really fun thing is that if you parse your data in bulk like this and you don't sort it before you put it out, you'll go through and then it'll just start erroring out. If you have one that's early on that's way ahead of the others, you're doomed. It just won't work.
How does that deal with daylight savings?
Everything is a Unix timestamp, so it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's seconds since the epoch.
Okay.
Epoch. So it's all basically UTC adjusted for your time zone. So you would always be minus 700 basically to it. The step, this tells us how often we expect to see updates in seconds. So 3,600 seconds, 1 hour. Every hour we expect to see another chunk of data. And this is because I didn't want to put in, for every message, okay, here's the timestamp for the message, here's the message, add one. Okay, plus it makes for boring graphs if they're all one. This is a data source declaration. Everything's colon separated. So the type is absolute. We'll talk about the data source types here in just a second. But basically absolute means that it's every time you read it, it resets the counter to 0. So like I read that, this hour I had 12 messages. And then the next hour, it's not going to be 12 messages plus 15 more, so 27. It's going to be 15 the next hour, and that's it. So it's absolute is a resetting counter, basically. It resets every time you read it. It expects data at least once per hour. This is different than this. Okay, this here tells us if we don't see data every 3,600 seconds, that it should put in a value as unknown in the database. This here tells us that basically the same thing, that we should receive data every 3,600 seconds of this particular data source. You can have different data sources in the same RD that receive rates that are different, that have different data refresh rates, and it'll just iron it all out. It's pretty cool. Okay, the minimum and maximum, that's the 0 and 5,000, which is the minimum and maximum range for the values that you receive. I thought 5,000 was plenty of room for an hourly total for me. If I ever get more messages than that at home, I'm just going to turn my computer off. And then this is a round robin archive, okay, which this is the consolidation function. This is the how many items in the list, what percentage of the items in this archive can be unknown for it to still be considered a valid piece of information. This is how many data items to store in this, and this is how many rows of this round robin archive to store. So what this says is take an average of all of them. Anytime you create an archive, it applies to all of your data sources unilaterally. It doesn't apply to one. There's no way to apply it to one other than creating separate databases. So this says take an average of at least 12 items, because out of 24 that are not unknown, for 24 of them, then take and hold 1,096 of those, which is basically 3 years plus 1. If you go 365 days and then add 1 day, because there might be a leap year in there. But there's never going to be 2 leap years in a 3-year period. So 3 years, 1 day. Okay, data sources. This is the generic declaration for it. Types are gauge. This is like a temperature reading. It can go up, it can go down, but it's always going to be some absolute value that's changing as it goes around. The counter, okay, is always incrementing. The example that they give in the man page is packet counts, and that's quite frankly what I use it for at work. Derive, which tells you, the derivative, first derivative of the difference between the two. So you put 12 in, you put 14 in, the derivative is, that delta, which is 2. And then absolute, which is what we're using, okay, which is a counter that zeroes out each time you sample it, and we're going to use that for our message counter, okay, because we get this many messages this hour, this many messages next hour, and so on. And HB is the heartbeat, how often you have to get in seconds that we must have a value. Okay, if it doesn't know, it'll show up. When you do like an RRD fetch, which we're not going to cover here, but if you do an RRDtool fetch, which is just get me some data from the database, you'll get values that show up as a U if you don't meet this requirement for the heartbeat. And that's what they are, is that it just inserted an unknown because you didn't get a data point in enough frequency. Min, max, we talked about that. Okay, round robin archives. The CF, this is a consolidation function. This is how am I going to treat the data that I'm going to get. And there's average, let's get through all of this, min, max, and last. Okay? Average is, the important thing to remember for the RRA is that no matter what consolidation function you use, it always normalizes your data to a per second item. So even if I put like max in here, and then I want to pull out the max value for it, it's going to say the maximum and average that over however much time that we put in for the sample point. So if we're only sampling every hour, it's going to divide the max value, whatever it is, by 3600. So when you get the data back out, you have to manipulate it to get that value, that actual value. And it's the precision that it uses double float precision, so it should be plenty accurate. That's what, oh gosh, I don't even know what that is. It's 8 bits of accuracy, so, or 8 bytes of accuracy, so that's pretty good. It's way out there.
64 bits, isn't it?
Yeah, it's 64 bits, but it's way out there.
Big number.
Yeah. The X-Files factor. I do not like this name, but it is what it is. Basically, the X-Files factor says that, okay, if I get a bunch of unknowns, which is why I think they say X-File factor, because it's unknown, from the TV show, then whether or not to add a row to this round-robin archive, or in the round-robin archive itself, put an unknown. Now, you might think that an unknown is a devastating thing, but you can actually, when you create a graph and you're using the archive, you can tell it what to do with the unknowns. It can either go to 0, it can go to max, or what it does by default is it interpolates that value. It says I have this point, and it just interpolates the value, and it draws a line through those two, and it puts the one in the middle right there. Okay. Steps is the number of data points per row. So like in our example, we were saying, okay, 24 for this. So we're logging the data every hour. We have 24 steps. So this round robin archive becomes a representation of a single day. For each row, that's 1 day's worth of messages. And then the rows is how many records of the RRA to keep. So we're keeping 1,096, 3 years plus 1 day, so that we can graph them. Okay. 1 record every hour, minimum value 0, maximum value is 5,000, 24 records, which is, take the average of 24 data points, making 1 day's data, and there's up to 12, and then we save 3 years, plus 1 is a week. Okay, now, this is off the screen. That's just a 0 out there. This is the update command. If you look at the RRDupdate.shell script, or I think it's just RRD update on the web page, it's just a bunch of these commands. And then you'll notice that this number is in sequence except for I think 3 duplicates, which I don't understand why they came through, but anyway. And there are 20 some odd thousand of them for the number of hours and the days since I started this. So there's a lot. And basically, it's just, that's it. It's the Unix timestamp, and then these are all the data values. Now the trick to these data values is that they have to be in the exact same order that we created them. If they're not, well then your data is going to be all over the place. But it's easy enough when you first do it. You know, just copy. The way I do it is I put my command into a text editor, get it all right there, create it. If I don't like the way it works out, I delete the RRD and I start over. And then I use that as the template for creating all of the other stuff. Okay. Here's the got you with don't ever put an earlier timestamp than the last row. And then updates are actually pretty quick. When I ran this as just a shell script, calling this command, 20,000 odd times, granted it cached the exe once it ran it the first time. It took like 25 seconds. It was nothing. It was up and done. And then there's this is actually incorrect. It doesn't have a .sh on it because when it had .sh on it, the browser just wanted to save it every time instead of display it. So I just dumped the .sh. Okay, demo. Okay. This was for earlier. There we go. All right, so this code, if you this is the file list. This code is available here. Okay, you see it's incredibly complicated and very long. Yeah. I have my server set up. I always set up on my personal box for parsing PHP through HTML or any other language that I want to for a preprocessor. I always make it so that it's HTML so that I'm not telling everybody in the world what I'm running. Yeah, that's a PHP page. Just old habit that dies hard. So all my HTML files on this box get parsed through PHP. But anyway, we sit here and we'll put in like that date and that date, and we can look at standard. Standard is just to display the message count, and then we'll see for that day, is a hot day. We come here at midnight, we got 2 whole messages, that's the gray. You look down here on the bottom, 2 were ham, and then we got 1 that was unsure, and then we got 1 that was unsure, and then the rest were ham for that day. If we go, I also made it so you can click on it so you can look at it just straight through. See that this is an HTML page, and it just takes a get for all the information, and it actually runs it. That's also available on here. It's the RRDgraph.html. Some people just marvel at the fact that you can do an HTML page that shows up as a graphic. Then the error train, and this shows, okay, here are the messages that I had that were errors. I had 1 here and 1 here, and then when I trained it and told it, well, yeah, it's spam. So it went from unsure to spam. So this says that, my filter didn't pick up anything and mark it as unsure that was a good message. So it's classifying my good messages correctly. This must be a new variant of spam that it got, so it was unsure, so it shipped it over to the unsure pile. I have proc mail recipes that back this up too, that if it's not a list or something like that, it actually gets shoved into its own directory. And if it is unsure and it's on a list or from somebody that I'm expecting, it shoves it into shoves a copy into the directory that I used to do my training on. And then I made it so that I could do both. It's just a little extra additional. And then that shows, this graph here and this graph here. And that's about it. I think that's it. I have questions.
So RRDtool is just a
parser that makes pretty graphs?
That's pretty much it. It's a back end for storing it, and then it's also a tool for creating graphs from it. And it'll output them directly to standard out. So like those graphs that you see here, here, they don't exist on the box at all.
It's parsed from the databases that are stored there.
Yeah, it gets parsed, and then it runs it through GD, and then it just kicks out. This is the code that generates those graphs.
Okay. In this particular instance, when you say that file, that graphic file, never gets created on your box, are you saying that's...
Not once. It's streamed back through the browser.
It's streamed back through the browser, so it picks up on the magic data and knows that it's a GIF or
right down here.
JPEG?
No, right down here.
PHP itself does it, I guess.
Right down here,
there
I
it is.
send the header.
Content type. That's it. That is slick. That's very cool.
You have to tell the browser what to do with it, otherwise it doesn't know.
Yeah.
And it'll try and think through it. Sometimes IE does this, which is part of why a lot of the image GIF, or what was it? Was it the GIF manipulation library or the JPEG library?
I think it was JPEG.
That you could introduce any kind of, binary data you wanted into that, and Explorer would pick it up and just happily launch it for you, because it was a JPEG, and you could overrun a buffer and get, party on, because it didn't require that content type header to come through.
Because it tries to figure it out itself.
Right. And there's been a number of vulnerabilities for different browsers for this. Mozilla has been, been victimized by it too, where you say, well, I mean, you guys see it in all your emails when you get a virus, you get it says content type, audio wave, and it's a .com file. Well, that's intended to confuse Outlook to let it execute in an unsafe context, because the OS doesn't look at that content type header, just the client does, for what to do with it, and then the client relies on Windows to pick up what the association inside of Windows itself, which is in the registry. It looks at it, it goes, oh, he's trying to run a .com file, and then it runs the .com file.
So just curious, Mike, you said that you wanted to see this. What are you planning on using RRDtool?
Well, we were using Cacti uses RRDtool for the basis of everything it does.
Oh, I got you.
Moving away from MRTG, which is a lot slower than RRDtool. And we can do a lot with MRTG, but
Only problem that I've ever had with MRTG is that it insists on running the graphs to disk every time, so that it becomes a static web page. RRDtool runs fast enough and it's clean enough that you don't need to run all that disk I/O. If you ever watched an MRTG box checking, not even that many routers, like 50 or 60 routers and switches, that box is working full time to do that 5-minute data, to make the SNMP queries, and then to shove it to disk, and then generate all the graphs. I mean, it used to be really bad when RRDtool was written in Perl, or well, the graph part was written in Perl. So you'd have, 200 instances of Perl launching at the same time, loading all the libraries up, and just crushing the box. I mean, we could watch, when we originally ran MRTG before Tobias wrote all of the RRD stuff in C, you could watch the box's CPU load. It would go every 5 minutes to 100%, both processors, and just for a minute, and then whoop, and 5 minutes later, whoop, and it just ran the life out of the box. We use Cricket because it does the exact same thing that we're doing here, except it actually does error checking.
As for Cricket, the one question I've had since I use MRTG at work, I know this is going to be a little bit of a digression, but my issue with MRTG is that, for example, I sometimes on my core router I add in sub interfaces on our ATM interface, and they take whatever numbers are available, and heaven forbid should I ever have to restart that, all the interfaces are going to get renumbered. All the interfaces that are created are going to get renumbered, whether they're ATM sub interfaces or multi-link interfaces. In the case of our DS3 channelized DS3 router, the indexes are going to change. Now,
Right.
is Cricket smart enough to handle that?
Well, nothing that's static will handle that, but the nice thing about Cricket is anytime your configs change, you just rerun the config builder.
Yeah.
And it goes and it queries the data from the router itself.
Yeah.
Logs in, gets the data, voila, rewrites the file.
And of course, then the issue is, like if I'm recovering from a power failure, what about all my other databases that I've been picking up data for, like all my other interfaces? And say, for example, interface index has changed.
Okay.
If does Cricket track that, or do I have to go and?
Nothing's going to track that because you're going to change the where the data is at.
Great. So I'm just as stuck.
Yeah, there's nothing that's going to change that. It's just going to make it easier to do your reconfiguration.
That's true. So
now you can manually go in and try and chart from A to B what the difference is, and what I do to hopefully overcome some of that is I run a tool called what's it called? Rancid. There we go. It's an open source. It stands for Really Awesome Network Config Differ, which is just a lame name, but it really works great. And it uses expect to log into into each of your routers, and it'll use Secure Shell or Telnet, and it'll use Secure Shell or Telnet, and then you can then get all of your configs that are hosted in CVS, so you can see your diffs, and it also send an email to your admin staff every time that it gets a change in the difference. It works great for us. I mean, actually, absolutely great. I've also managed to make it so that my boss, who's scripting foo is pretty much non-existent, but he loves Linux. He loves to run Linux. He loves the fact that it saves us so much money at work, that he is able to up and down our wireless radio for our wireless AP, because we don't have enough users on it that we have to worry about leaving it up all the time. So we just turn it on, turn it off as we need it. So all he has to do is he logs into the machine, he types W up, and it turns the wireless radio on. Then he comes back to his desk, he types W down, and it turns the interface off. All automatically, I get a page because sudo is run, but that's it. And it runs as the Rancid user, so I have it a sudo entry that allows these people to run, any of the people on the list to run this command as Rancid, because Rancid has the config information in its configuration, the password and stuff like that. But yeah, it's a cool product, and expect rocks. That's a whole different thing. That's expect is like if you were to sit down at a shell command and be interacting, expect allows you to do that, to interact with stuff. But that's how I manage the config changes, because then if my configuration changes, I have a copy of it that it just downloaded no longer than an hour ago, ever. So, and it doesn't just get the config changes either. It tells you like what iOS is on there, and there's a bunch of information on there. So it's pretty cool stuff, and it just works. It's one of those things that just works too. And its overhead is pretty negligible. Questions, comments, money? And most of you are still awake. There's not a lot that I can do with the RRDtool for you guys as far as an intro, without like going over the edge into like, okay, this is what you would use it for. That was one of the things I was struggling with initially, was finding a good example to give you guys for, this is what I'm using it for. Because it could be anything.
What other types of uses have you seen it?
For me? Oh gosh, I mean, the sky's the limit. Anything that you only want the last 90 days of. Literally. That you can graph, that it's beneficial to graph. You can use it to graph changes in state. One of the things that I want to do with it that I haven't yet is I want to hack onto Nagios, which is a network monitoring tool, and add the CPU utilization graphs. Because I'm grabbing the information, but all Nagios gives me is the last read. So I want to get CPU utilization on a graph, over X amount of time. I know that Nagios runs its monitors every 5 minutes. So it goes, gets a data point, then all I need to do is wrap the the call that it makes in a little shell script and have it redirect the data over to an RRD template with a little, timestamp. Which to get the Unix timestamp in basically any Unix at all, you just type date space plus %s, done. And that'll give you, right now, Unix timestamp. To get it for some arbitrary time, you do date space -d, and in quotes you put the date, month, day, year, time, year, day, month, time. You can spell it out. There's a number of different ways you can put it in there. It's pretty intuitive to figure it out. And then plus %s at the end, and that'll give you the timestamp. And it just, every time. So getting the timestamp from the shell is really easy. Really, really easy. Technotard. Good word.
Thank you, Rob.
Godwin's theorem.